I think everyone is just about here. So let's get started. For those that you don't know us, we're BGV, Europe's leading early stage tech for good VC. We invest in ambitious and diverse founders using technology to create positive impact at scale. We're a team of 6 in total, all brought together over a belief that tech for good can help solve some of our biggest and more pressing real-world problems, from climate crisis to inequality to poor health. So today, we're introducing the impact report, but myself, Rob, I'll introduce some of the insights of BGV and the portfolio's progress over the past year. So yeah, for myself, I'm Rob, I'm the Operations Associate at BGV, but then we'll also deep dive into the 3 areas of the impact report and hopefully bring them to life for you. I'll hand over to Paul, our CEO and managing partner, who will be discussing a little bit more about the Tech for Good leadership theme that we decided to focus on in this year's report. He'll then introduce Yumi, our Operations and Insights Manager, who'll be chatting to Alice Tyler from Picklo, their co-founder and Chief Product Officer. He'll be discussing Picklo's journey of developing their product and also leading their industry change. Nelly, our portfolio manager, will also be discussing building great boards with Darren, one of BGV's venture partners. But throughout the different discussions, Melanie, our managing partner, is also on the chat just to help with any questions along the way. So feel free, if you've got any questions about our impact methodology or approach, feel free to ask her. And we'll also open up for a short Q&A at the end if you've got any questions remaining. But yeah, thank you for joining us. And I'll start with a little bit of background on our impact report. So as you can see, it's evolved a little bit over the years. And since becoming a B Corp in 2015, when we first published our impact report, each year they've kind of evolved with different ways of showing how we've collected, analysed, and also shared our impact data. We always aim to be radically transparent in our methods and practices. And our impact report is a great way for us to do this and push each year to become better, but also capture the nuances of stories across our portfolio in different ways. So this year, we opened our impact report up to many different perspectives. For example, our portfolio founders, their customers and users, our investors, and also venture partners, which I'm thankful that some of them can join us today to share their stories. It's an extensive project that we start kind of in October of last year. And we spend the year collecting the data to get it into the shape that you can see from today. So yeah, I'll start by reflecting on some of the BGV highlights from last year. So last year, we were recognized as one of the best for the world B Corps. Out of 5,000 B Corps worldwide, we were scored among the top 5% in governance. We also ranked 2nd globally for our diversity, inclusion, and equity performance by the Equality Group's Inclusive PE and VC Index for the 2nd year running as well, which is really good to see. We were selected as one of the winners of the Escape the Cities, the Escape 100 campaign, as one of the top purposeful organizations in 2022. And also alongside these achievements, we ran 26 founder-facing events with over 1,200 attendees at those events. This is a mix of our investment readiness workshops, investor AMAs, but then also the Tech for Good meetups, which we run throughout the year for the Tech for Good community. So from kind of an investment highlight perspective, we made 21 investments, 11 of those being at the investment stage, but then also 10 follow-on investments. We finished the year with a resilient realized and unrealized portfolio valuation of Fund 1 of 2.3 multiple of the capital invested. And of our 84 active portfolio companies, 14 of those successfully raised follow-on investment in 2022. It was also good to see we had 2 exits which occurred in 2022. One of them being the Science Writing Revolution, which was acquired by Springer Nature. Science Writing Revolution was an academic digital solution aimed to improve the working lives of academics. And now, from like an impact, more focused perspective, those 84 active companies positively impacted over 16 million lives of their users of products and services. But to show the impact, the quality of this impact, we first shared our portfolio standards of evidence analysis in 2021 using Nesta's framework, which we use. And once again, this year, our analysis shows positive correlation between our company stage and level of impact rigor, as 100% of our portfolio companies at Series A or higher have obtained a standard of evidence level 3 or above, meaning that they can demonstrate causality of their impact. Whilst also in 2022, we saw early stage companies progress into level 7 of these, progress into level 2, and also 2 additional ventures obtaining level 5, the most rigorous level of impact validation. So then also, as you can see, those 84 active companies are split across those 3 themes, with 25% contributing to a sustainable planet, 42% contributing to a better society, and also a third contributing to healthy lives. The total of the revenue generated by our portfolio increased from 54 million in 2021 to over 80 million in 2022. And now to shine a light on some of those stories and the portfolio's progress over the last year. For example, Tickets for Good winning the Impact Award at the Ticketing Business Forum, and also Club Soda, Birdsong, and Let Us Grow obtaining the B Corp certification. Alongside Chatterbox's CEO and founder, Mersal, and Sirona's co-founder, Anya, were named as 2 of the top 50 women in the European tech. So that's alongside many of the other achievements across the portfolio, and we're immensely proud to be able to be part of these founders' journeys to creating a better future. But yeah, so what I've highlighted earlier was our theme of this year was Tech for Good Leadership. So this is particularly special as the first year that we've actually chosen a theme. And now I'll kind of hand over to Paul to share a few more insights and observation around Tech for Good Leadership.
Thanks very much, Rob. Yes, as some of you have noticed, the chat isn't actually enabled. We will try and work out how to do that. But if you want to put something in the Q&A, then people will be able to see that, or we'll be able to respond as well. So yeah, when we chose leadership as the theme for this year's BGV Impact Report, it was a reflection on something we'd noticed shining through really in 2022. We'd been really impressed by the way that some of the founders in the BGV portfolio had handled what had been a pretty tough year in the tech world, to be honest. The froth of 2021 ended pretty abruptly. The fundraising environment completely changed, and it made life very difficult for them. They had to navigate increasingly difficult decisions, sometimes just in order to survive. In many ways, that was no different from tech more generally, but we noticed that Tech for Good founders seemed to be doing things a little bit differently. And actually, they had a few advantages. The first thing that struck us talking to founders for this report was that having an important mission, a social or environmental mission, actually really helps them. It helps motivate them personally, and it helps them to motivate their teams. It also gives them a focus when it comes to changing their plans as the world changes around them. The question, does it help us achieve our mission, is a fantastic North Star for strategic decisions. Another advantage that we saw Tech for Good startups having around leadership is that they're serving needs, not wants. The markets that they work in, whether that's energy, health, education, they don't go away in a downturn in comparison to some other products. That means it's easier, to some extent, for investors to see how Tech for Good startups could ride out difficult times. The next thing that hard times highlight is leadership qualities that might not be obvious on paper. This, I think, gives us a bit of an advantage as BGV because we go well beyond the usual suspects when it comes to the diversity of the founders in our portfolio, especially actually when it comes to their work backgrounds. As Steve for Tickets for Good says in the report, you learn a lot from running a nightclub, for example, that you can apply to startup life, not something you might have thought about. Finally, there's something that we've known for a long time, which I think has become clearer still recently, and that's that leadership isn't just about CEOs. You'll hear from Alice in a moment, who leads on product at Picklo, but has also played a huge leadership role in their journey from being well ahead of the curve when it comes to the energy transition to now being right in the thick of it, as the market has caught up with some of their thinking and some of their ideas about how things should work. You'll also hear from Darren about good practice around startup boards, which I think are a really vital part of startup leadership. They've got a vital role in fostering and holding leadership to account. It's pretty easy to say that early stage investing is all about people. Of course it is. When you're investing at such an early stage, people are right at the center of your decisions as an investor as to whether to back that startup or not. But one of our principles at BGV is understand the problem. And we believe that in impact investing, you have to look at those people in the context of the problem that they're trying to solve, the system that they're trying to change. Do they have a deep understanding of it? Do they have real empathy for all of the stakeholders involved? Are they capable of developing trust with a large team of employees and with investors? And this brings us onto a theme that we're thinking about going forward, which is something that we feel has to be part of tech for good investing, and that's responsible leadership. I actually think that Mark Zuckerberg did us all a favor by defining what tech for good isn't when he coined the phrase "move fast and break things." The tech for good equivalent probably isn't as catchy. It's something like move fast, measure the impact you're having as you go, and regularly consider the unintended consequences of your business, which I admit isn't the catchiest catchphrase, but I think that's at the heart of it. It is more nuanced than many ways of thinking about leadership that we see in other sectors, other businesses. And we've been incredibly fortunate to have worked with hundreds of founders of tech for good businesses over our last decade, and helping people to discover and develop their responsible leadership skills is something that we hope to do much more of now, and much more over the years to come. So yeah, I hope you enjoy reading the report, and I'll now hand over to Yumi, and we'll be talking to Alice from Picklo.
Great, thank you, Paul. Hi, everyone. My name is Yumi. I run operations at BGV, and today I'm very pleased to be joined by Alice Tyler, the CPO and co-founder of Picklo. Just for a bit of context, BGV first invested in Picklo back in 2013, and I think it's fair to say that the last year has been incredibly exciting on all fronts. Picklo has recently partnered with the National Grid, expanded to the US, and just closed an £8 million Series B round. So we thought now would be the perfect time to talk to Alice and learn more about her journey with Picklo, and just general kind of insights and lessons from growth in the energy industry. So Alice, welcome.
Thanks, Yumi.
Great. So just to kick us off, for those familiar with Picklo, could you please briefly tell us what Picklo does and what problem you're trying to solve?
Yes. So Picklo has built a flexibility marketplace, which is used within the electricity industry to help the grid operators find and contract with flexibility providers to help them do things like balance their needs on the grid. And it's solving a particular problem, or one of many problems, around how does the energy industry transition to a sort of net zero future.
Amazing, very clear. So as mentioned, Picklo achieved several impressive milestones over the last few years. And when we talked previously, you mentioned it took 10 years to get to this point because you essentially just had to operate within a traditionally slow-moving industry. Can you just tell us what makes your market particularly hard for new startups to enter?
Yeah, so the energy industry is heavily regulated. That's the short version of the answer. Slightly longer version is that it depends where in the energy industry you're trying to innovate. We are in the particularly slow moving part of the grid networks. They're the oldest and most heavily regulated part. There are slightly more faster moving elements. They're still regulated, but they can be a little bit more innovative. So like, for example, the supply companies, I don't know if anyone will have sort of seen the sort of slightly boom and bust years of Bulb, but they were a new startup when we were a new startup, and they went, you know, they did some really big, exciting things. Ultimately, also, you know, haven't lasted the course. But so it does depend on where in the energy industry you're looking to solve problems.
Great. And as you mentioned, Piclo entered about 10 years ago, and I think you were probably one of the first entrants, into the market at that time. Do you feel like you entered the market a bit too early, perhaps, and kind of to what extent did people understand what Piclo did?
We did. So 10 years ago, when we were at BGV, we were actually working on what we call product number one. Which was it was still, we were trying to build a marketplace, but we were trying to build it in a different part of the industry. Ultimately, that product was a solution looking for a problem, and too early. And we couldn't have taken that product any further, because essentially we hit regulation, and not enough. Paul just mentioned this, there really wasn't enough need for it. We weren't solving a good enough problem to survive. So in 2017, about 5 years ago, we pivoted to product number two, which is the flexibility marketplace that I mentioned. And this timing was perfect, because the grid networks were just about that time starting to realize that they had this problem, and flexibility would help them solve it. And we had proven that we could build a good marketplace solution. And so we kind of offered to work with the grid companies in the UK, and they helped us sort of design and develop the early marketplace as it was. So timing on product number one was bad, timing on product number two was perfect. Great.
And I guess just curious to learn more about your product development and how you thought about product development over all these years. Kind of in particular, given the fact that you work within the energy industry, which is known for being quite slow, have there been any challenges in applying user-led design principles to Piclo?
Yes, absolutely, lots of challenges. So as you say, we run a sort of user-led design principle at Piclo, and one of the difficult challenges is working with a regulated monopoly like our customers are, trying to get them to standardize processes, which, in theory should all be standard because they all do the same job at different parts of the UK, but ultimately they are all unique. They're all unique companies, and they have unique people in them. And so having to work with, they have this sort of sibling rivalry is one way to describe the relationship our customers have with each other. And has been really tricky to sort of sit them all down and go, look, this solution has to work for all of you. You're going to share this product together. That's been tricky. Ultimately, politics plays a little bit of, I guess, slight puppet master respects in here. So that's difficult. It's not just the humans, it's the politics behind them as well.
Makes sense. And just to finish off, do you have any advice for investors or founders in our audience working on complex problems that might take a long time to solve?
Yes, some advice would be to have, for investors would be to have patience with the companies and the teams you're working with, because if anyone's working on some of the problem areas like we are, they're really complex. They're really, really complex. And ultimately, no matter how fast we could move in terms of being a software company, really agile in terms of the way we've structured, how fast we can build things, you can only move as fast as your slowest sort of player. And our customers are can be really slow with when they're ready to use parts of the product, or when they're willing to do things like integrate and automate. I think there'll be a lot of people surprised to see how little automation has happened yet in this part of the industry. And they're not ready for it. And you just have to be patient with that, because you can't force it. So patience, I think, is a big one. And I guess, have faith that if you're solving a useful problem to solve, keep going, because it's worth it. I think at the end, to see people using a product and it helping them either move towards net zero or run their businesses better or save more lives, or whichever particular area that people are working on, it's always going to be worth it.
Thank you so much, Alice. This was really helpful and really interesting. I'm going to hand over to Nelly at this point.
Thanks, Yumi. Thanks, Alice. And hello, everyone. My name's Nelly, and I'm on the investment team at BGV. And now we're going to move on to the next topic when talking about responsible leadership, and that's very important in that, and that is good governance and how boards can help leaders be more effective. So to help me do this, I'd like to introduce you all to Darren Coburn, who brings over 30 years experience as a non-exec, having served on boards of lots of different types of tech and tech for good companies, from the initial stages all the way to successful exits. And we're very lucky to have Darren as one of our venture partners, and he works primarily with our later stage companies, advising them on a range of topics from fundraising to growth and governance. So to kick us off, Darren, could you give us a little bit more context on what a board actually is and what are some of the responsibilities that you've had as a director over the years?
Great. Well, first of all, it's great to be here and to see so many participants. And it's really interesting when we talk about boards and the duties of directors, because increasingly we're finding that politicians and the regulators are saying that directors have to think much more about impact and their role as stakeholders. Every company has a board in the UK because every company has to have a director. So you start off with a single director or a co-founders, and they are the company board, which is the statutory requirement, and they are the people that run the company effectively. They have a duty to stakeholders that's set down in law, 7 duties in the Companies Act of 2006, which are really about being independent, about thinking about the company and what's good for the company, but increasingly for stakeholders as well. And really, as a director, you have to follow the rules, make sure you've got the filings done and all of those sort of things. And that really is sort of the traditional board of directors. But we see as well a lot of advisory boards. You know, when you're working with startups, it's often a way of having input and advice and build a network of people that can really help you grow without necessarily having to have that legal requirement to be a director and on the board. And advisory boards are typically people within the industry or have great expertise who you can work with as a founder and can support you. Actually, the truth is that all types of boards should be there to support you as a director and support you as a founder and try to actually help you build your business and be successful.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, the difference between advisory board and an actual board. But at what point should founders actually start to think about formalizing that a little bit more into a board? And do you have any advice for those who are starting to think about setting one up?
Yeah, I think you often find that the pressure to start to grow your board comes as you take on investments. So particularly as you get to Series A and certainly Series B, you'll find that the investors will want to have a director on the board. And that is certainly one of the points where, as a founder, you're going to have to think, you know, about running the board, having it, building it, and how you do it. But actually, you may want to think about it earlier. I was on the board of Mobile IQ, which was a startup from when it started right through to when it was actually sold to Quark about 6 years later. And the couple that started it, were the 2 directors, the founders. They took some investment in, realized they needed some extra governance around that. And I came on. They had about a dozen employees at that point. And then as the company grew, we then went outside and brought on a chairman who worked on the board and helped prepare it through and take it through that sale process. So it does depend. I mean, another example would be Audio Boom, where I started off with the founders and 3 staff, and we brought in a board because I was a shareholder representative initially. Then I ended up sitting on the board as an independent. And there it was really interesting because we had a mix of investors and outsiders on the board. We had a very experienced chairman there who'd actually had been the chairman of the London Stock Exchange, which is fantastic, because as you went through that roller coaster of trying to raise funds and keep the company going, often in difficult times, having those people sitting around the table who are up to speed, who could really then represent the company in discussions with potential investors was really valuable. So I think the answer is slightly, it's going to depend on your circumstances, but thinking about it earlier on rather than when you're forced to do it, and thinking about the composition of the board is something that I think is really valuable.
Yeah, thanks. That's really helpful. And what are some of the more common mistakes that you see founders make when they're setting up a board? And I know it's quite a broad topic, and we could probably spend hours talking about it. But just some of the ones that you highlighted in the impact report, and some of the strategies or things that founders can do to avoid making those mistakes.
I think there's two aspects. There's the setting up the board and then the running of the board. And if we just talk about running a board, I think one of the really important things to think about is that your board should be, if you're the founder, should be something that is really valuable. It's a set of people who understand your business, who are there to support you, who have a requirement to support you even. And so when you're thinking about your board, you have to think about it as a discussion forum. Yes, you're reporting to them, but make sure that you're then discussing the future. You're thinking about the challenges, thinking about how do you actually use these people with great experience normally, who will have seen similar situations, to help you build your business. So, one of the mistakes I think is people think of it as a sort of a burden. It's just a reporting requirement, and it certainly shouldn't be that. It should be an opportunity to have an open and honest discussion with people who know your business. And I think that's one of the things that we see is people just feeling like this is just another tick box exercise. It's also, you have to think of it as a discussion forum. It's not just a report from you as the founder. And you do see that occasionally, that it's sort of one-way traffic rather than building the agenda and having the space to do that. You also talked about setting up a board and the composition. I think that comes to the composition of the board. If you're talking about advisory boards, you can have a very interesting and wide mix, but you have to make sure that when you set that up, all the people on there have value. All the people are going to, because you're going to be paying them typically with some sort of stock options. So those advisory board people, you need to agree with them what they are going to do, what's their time commitment, how often are you going to meet, and make sure you have some structure around it. They're not just a load of people who sit on the website and make it look good. That use them for real value. When we're talking, however, about real boards, sort of company boards, one of the things I think you need to think about is diversity. I was fortunate to be on the board of Espresso Education, which was a primary school interactive video content business for a period. And the board there was basically made up of a load of investors. So sadly, the board, when you looked around the table, was not very diverse. It was all male, pale and stale like myself. And what that then meant that we didn't make as good decisions as we should have. And a particular example of that was when Espresso wanted to go into the US market. We all went, great, fantastic, we've done so well in the UK, this is going to be easy. We didn't have anybody there who could challenge and say, actually, the US is different, it's really quite difficult. And it meant that the company, although it was successful and was eventually acquired by a US company, it took a lot longer to get there. And that was an example of just having the same thought pattern around the board table. And so I think one of the things when you're setting up and developing your board is to think about diversity, think about that. But you've also got to have people that you, as a founder, you're going to be able to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've touched on this already a little bit, but how do you know when a board is functioning well, working well together, and how honest do you think feedback should be?
Well, it's a difficult question, a really difficult question. I think the answer is that when a board isn't working well. You know that it's not working well when people are trying to dominate, when you're not able to have that open and honest conversation. You know that it's going wrong when board members are talking to each other and behind the back of the founder, for example. I have been in a situation where we had to replace the founder and go and talk to the founder and say, look, we're going to change your role because the business has changed. So how do you know when the board's working well? It's working well because it is open, the conversations are honest, that you as a founder are finding it's supportive, you're finding that it is helping you to build your business, it's helping you to solve the challenges, and it's giving you that breadth of experience there. So I think the answer to when is the board working well, it feels good. What you really notice is when it's going wrong is when it doesn't feel that good. And the times when that really happens are the crunch times, when you're suddenly running out of money or you're trying to get a funding round and you suddenly pulling on people and saying, you've really got to help, and hopefully they'll step up. And that is the sign of a good board.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much, Darren. Lots there. I'm sure we could talk about this topic for hours, and maybe we'll run a session on it at some point in the future. And that kind of closes the talks for this event, and we're going to move on to the Q&A section. Oh, there's quite a long question in the Q&A. Paul, you've put your
Thanks.
So
Hong-il has asked a bit about the culture of BGV. I might actually bring Yumi in as well at this moment. So Yumi leads a lot on our work around our B Corp assessment, and Hong-il has asked, why do we get such a good score in governance for B Corp? Yumi, do you want to try and answer that?
Sure. I mean, it's difficult to explain quickly, and I think the questions you get in your B Corp assessment will differ depending on the size of your company and your industry. But I think if I was to summarize, like, your approach to transparency and sharing information is incredibly important. We at BGV, I think, are pretty open. Like, I don't think there's anything that's hidden from anyone. So if you want to access financial information, impact data, salaries, like literally anything, you can find it somewhere in our systems. And I think that's something that helped us get quite a high score at BGV. The other thing is your approach to decision making. So how ethical is it? How do you take into account the opinions of other people? So in this respect, we have several policies. We have even like whistleblowing policies and kind of more like compliance related ones that make sure that we don't do anything evil. And the others is, of course, like kind of who you actually represent in your team and your board. So kind of we always try to make sure that we are diverse and that we take into account kind of the opinions of all of our stakeholders, not just us. So I think these things combined probably helped us to get quite a high B Corp score.
Yep, that's great. And then just going into some of the other aspects of Hong-il's questions, do we have any partnerships in Asia? Not really, actually. We've got some sort of contacts, if you like, but no formal partnerships in Asia at the moment. And what's the main reason startups choose BGV instead of another VC? I think what we hear is that people choose us because of that focus on tech for good, that we are genuinely one of the only very early stage investors who just focus on tech for good businesses, so tech businesses that have that positive social and environmental impact. And obviously over the last 10 years we've developed a lot of skills and a lot of know-how and a lot of networks around how to do that really well. So I think it's that focus that helps startups to choose us over other VCs where we are the right investor, of course. So I hope that answers that question. And yes, we're very happy to share the recording of this session as well. We'll send everybody a link afterwards that has a link to the video recording of the session. Okay, any other questions? Emma asks, do you have any advice or thoughts for ensuring responsible exits from tech for good or socially motivated companies? That's a very interesting one. Yeah, it's a live topic for us as we're 10 years into our first fund anyway, so we're seeing fairly regular exits now, and we have to consider those exits in terms of, do they continue to provide impact? So, do we believe that exit actually is likely to maintain and preserve the impact of our investment beyond it happening? So it's a really important consideration for us as investors. And I think what we find is generally that founders want that too, because if they've spent so much time building up a business that has a positive impact, when it comes to deciding on exit opportunities, they also want to be really sure that the exit means that the impact that they've created or that they've helped create is preserved. So I think that's very important.
Paul, shall I add something?
Yeah, sure.
Having sat on the other side and doing acquisitions in large corporates, one of the things that's really important to make those successful is to have the right cultural fit. And as the founder or as the investor selling in, you want to make sure that there's a really good fit, and that you believe that the companies that are buying you, if you're exiting through trade sales, are going to actually take what you've built and keep it going. Clearly, one of the things that's changed for the big corporates over the last 5 years is the much greater impact on the ESG. And therefore, for tech for good investments, I think you're in a really strong place in talking to some of the large corporates and saying, and how are you going to make sure that the impact continues to grow, continues to develop? How is working with you going to then take this across your whole organization in a way that perhaps if you'd been having that conversation 15, 20 years ago, you wouldn't have had the ability to do?
Yeah, I think that certainly resonates, doesn't it? I mean, we've certainly seen examples where companies have been approaching our portfolio companies because they want the impact. It's not necessarily that they're just looking for a bit of technology or whatever it is. It's actually the impact that is the thing that's generating the interest in the first place, which is a real change from even 5 years ago, I think. So yeah, fascinating. Right, a few more questions. Ilgar from Azerbaijan asks if we have any interest in emerging markets. We are very much kind of UK company focused at BGV. So we predominantly invest in UK based businesses. So while we do back businesses that have an impact elsewhere in the world, our focus is really on UK based businesses. Yumi, I'm going to ask you to come on again. So Paulina asked, which of your D&I actions would you say has been the most impactful?
I think it's quite hard to choose a favorite one, but I think in terms of the action that kind of led us to the most conversations is probably like the publishing of our diversity and inclusion data, like both on our team and on our portfolio founders. So we publish data on metrics such as like gender, ethnic background, socioeconomic background, but also kind of a bit more unusually for the VC world, things like sexual orientation, experience of being kind of a previous founder, immigration status, etc. And we did the same for our team. And I think that's probably been the action that kind of helped us to have like the most productive conversations with other people in the ecosystem, for sure. I don't know, Paul, if you would agree? I
think so. I think being open about the data, even if in some cases, it's not always great, but then we can act upon it and try and change it. So I think, yeah, publishing the data. I guess the other one is particularly in recruiting to our team using sort of blind recruitment tools in terms of not knowing the gender or name or identity of people when we're doing shortlisting. I think that's had quite an impact.
Yep, for sure.
Right, Michelle, from BGV perspective, how do you typically engage with policymakers on reshaping the VC landscape? Is there a team working on policy advocacy for more institutional instruments to support your ecosystem? And what's your view on emerging ESG policy and regulatory trends on the growth of early stage tech for good companies? Yeah, so that's a big question. So we definitely do try to keep very much on top of policy at BGV. I think it's difficult to sort of, we certainly don't have a big team working on it. We really try to just keep on top of it and keep engaged with policymakers and so on. It's difficult for us to sort of respond to very short-term things. So we're always asking questions, I guess, about long-term policy particularly. So we try to keep on top of it, and we do try to give policymakers as much insight as we can about what we're seeing affecting the early stage founders. And we found that that's quite a helpful way of influencing policy by actually being able to give policymakers real data, and regulators, to be honest, real data about what's affecting startups. That allows them to shape their ideas and to be more, hopefully more effective and more positive for the startup ecosystem, and particularly in our case for the impact startup ecosystem over the long term. So we don't particularly lobby for specific changes or anything like that, but we do try to share as much insight as we can with policymakers about what we see working and what isn't. Following, does your differentiation to other investors including priorities on exit, ever lead to difficulties or challenges with co-investors? That's an interesting question. I think we don't have big bust-ups with other co-investors very often around impact stuff. I'm sure there are tensions, and it's not been a big issue so far, I think, because we do tend to find that, as well as acquirers wanting to invest in BGV, wanting to acquire BGV portfolio companies because of their impact, we also find increasingly that co-investors and investors who come in at later stages want to invest in BGV companies because of their impact as well. So I think that lessens the tensions to some extent, in that we don't get investors who want something completely different from our portfolio companies, at least not very often. So yeah, I think there's probably less tensions than you might imagine between the impact investing world and the sort of mainstream conventional investing world. Right, they're coming in thick and fast now. I might need some help from the others. Martin asks, as a very, very early stage tech for good VC, could you clarify the latest stage that you're ready to get involved? Sometimes come across organizations who look like they could become great tech for good companies, but maybe aren't sufficiently early stage for BGV. Yeah, so that is something that differentiates BGV from a lot of other VC firms, is the stage that we invest. So we love to invest at pre-seed stage. So that's typically when teams have a prototype of a product and a really deep understanding of the problem that they're trying to solve. But we're typically the very first investor that would work with them. So yeah, so even seed stage companies are often a bit too late for BGV. So yeah, we do predominantly work at that super early stage, invest at that stage, really get to know the teams, and then we do make follow-on investments into those teams, but we don't make any new investments at seed or Series A, for example. Camilla asks, have you seen a change in the subsectors and investment areas you focus on as a result of macroeconomic environment changes in the past year and a half? Interesting to know if you're seeing more or less of particular impact areas. I don't know whether the others want to join in on this one as well, but I'd say that we've seen big growth around what I think people are increasingly calling climate tech. And some of that comes from a shift all the way up the chain, if you like, of interest into technologies that can solve or can contribute towards net zero, or those kinds of targets. That's both, I think, at the customer level, so companies who want to buy products that help them to achieve their net zero goals, through to investors who want to allocate capital. So climate, or a sustainable planet, as we call it, from an impact themes perspective, certainly up until relatively recently was the smallest of our three buckets, if you like, of impact. But it's now very much, on a par with healthy lives and a better society in terms of both volume of deal flow we see, but also the volume of co-investment from other investors as well. So I would say that we have seen a shift towards climate and sustainability in our investing and in the portfolio over the last year and a half. Meryl asks, how does BGV maintain the relationship with your LPs and bring in more investors to join impact investing? That's another big question. So we have really good relationships with our existing LPs. I think that comes from us sharing a lot of information about what we're seeing, and Yumi and other people in the team do a really good job of collecting our reporting data from portfolio companies that we then feed back to our LPs, limited partners, the investors in our funds, on a quarterly basis, and actually often a little bit more often than that when we see them, and we try to maintain that relationship over time. And we know that they're really interested in the stories of the startups. They want to know what's going on. They want to hear how things are developing. And I think sharing that data, sharing those stories with our LPs is the way that we work with existing ones. In terms of new LPs, again, I think because we're very open, we share a lot about what we learn and what we're up to at BGV. We do tend to get quite a lot of new investors contact us and want to know about potential opportunities to invest with BGV. As well as that, we're obviously also out there often looking for potential investors in our funds as well. So it's a mixture of, I think, collecting information, sharing that information in a way that people find useful, and then also wherever we can, being open about that as well. Okay, so Hongil, many startups are struggling because of the current economic issues. How does BGV support your companies? Oh, that's another big question. I might ask Nelly to come back on that. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the startup support that we offer, particularly, I guess, some of the later stage companies who have been, I guess, more hit by some of the economic conditions?
Yeah, so we've definitely seen a lot of startups try and extend their runway and manage their runway in a difficult time and make it extend it further. So we've been running a lot of sessions to help them do that, and also think about how they can focus a little bit more on profitability in the shorter term. So at BGV we provide a lot of support in the form of sessions, bringing various companies in the portfolio together so that they can share learnings and insights, particularly if they're facing a similar challenge or are in a similar industry. But we also provide a lot of bespoke support within the BGV team, but also with our venture partners to help teams in this difficult macroeconomic period. This morning, actually, we also ran some investor mentoring sessions. So always, introducing teams to investors so that they can raise more money is definitely a big area of help that we provide.
Great, thanks, Nelly. Michelle asked, what can media journalists do to amplify the impact and learnings of BGV journey, including the investees? Yeah, it's interesting. I think journalists really play an increasing role, actually, in telling the story of what's the changes that are happening in business, because I think they are really quite significant. The shift towards mission-driven businesses, towards impact investing. When you look at the figures, and there's a big shift going on underneath individual stories, if you like. But I think that is generally, for most people, that's brought to life through the stories of individual startups. and then the products and services that they provide and the way that that benefits people and the way that it benefits all of us in the case of some of them. So yeah, it's the job of journalists is to tell stories. And that's a really important part of what's going on in Tech for Good at the moment. The other side, I would say, though, is holding us to account, because yeah, there's been a huge growth in impact investing, huge growth in all of the things that we've been talking about today, and actually that's going to attract some bad actors as well. And I think there will be some startups who, say that they're having some kind of impact, and it turns out they're not. There will be investors who create funds where they say that they're having a particular impact and they're not. And having journalists dig into the detail of the stories around impact investing and around Tech for Good, I think is a jolly good thing, because it's going to hold people more to account. And that, in terms of the future of impact investing and actually genuinely having a positive impact on the world, it's really important that we're held accountable, and that we don't get into a situation where a lot of impact investing or Tech for Good startups are essentially greenwashing or impact washing, because that benefits nobody. So I think the role of media and journalists in holding this to account is super important. Okay, I think I'm going to hand quickly back to Rob, who's going to just wrap up for us.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Paul, for dealing with all those questions very well. But no, thank you for everyone for your questions and joining us this afternoon. I've just put the link to this year's impact report into the chat, whereas you can also find it on our website, where you can download it, and please share it with your networks and give it a read, as there are lots of insightful stories which you can see. But if you've got any remaining questions, feel free to contact us. Our email and contact details are on the slide. And yeah, thank you very much for joining us, and have a wonderful afternoon.